Tom, I thought we'd start by talking about Justin Trudeau because apparently that's what
Really?
everybody's doing these days. So, number one, and maybe we get to the foreign interference thing a little later, but I want to know because we had Dimitri Soudis on yesterday with a theory that I have not heard from anybody else in terms of is he leaving, is he staying, will they prorogue, things we've talked about in the past.
Yeah.
This is what Dimitri Soudis said.
The rationale, according to some senior Liberal government officials, is that he wants to run knowing that he is going to lose, but he doesn't want to burn the next Liberal leader. What does that mean? He wants to take that defeat, lose the next election. The Liberals, after the next election, find themselves as an opposition party, and therefore the new Liberal leader after the next election will have a clean slate.
What do you think?
Well, it's a theory I've heard before from another conservative. So just in case people don't know, of course, Dimitri Soudis was a longtime advisor to Stephen Harper at the highest level. So this is something that the conservatives that I know in the field are spinning out there. It could be true that Trudeau actually does want to keep going. The senior Liberals that I've spoken to, and really they are at the highest level, I'm not sure they all speak to Dimitri, but they're telling me that there is a plan in place to have prorogation, what you and I have already talked about, pulling the switch, saying we're going to suspend Parliament for a bit, go see Mary Simon, do that, have a leadership in an abbreviated form. That's also in Eddie Goldenberg's letter, and I hope we get a chance to get to that. So that's the type of thing that's out there, and of course, the resignation of Trudeau. Now, all of Trudeau's behavior in the past few weeks tends to reinforce Dimitri Soudis' point of view, that Trudeau's actually thinking of sticking around. But if you think about it for about 1.5 seconds, it makes absolutely no sense to intentionally lead your party to slaughter in the polls when you can see that Canadians are not enamored of Pierre Poilievre. In fact, he's got, an overall negative from the Canadian voting population. But Trudeau is so unbelievably unpopular that if I was a conservative, I'd be doing everything I could to talk up the fact that, really, this guy Justin Trudeau, he has every reason to stay, whereas actually he doesn't.
Okay, let's then shift to, you mentioned, for people who don't know, Eddie Goldberg, former right-hand man in John Chrétien's administration, published an open letter today. Yeah, what did he have to say? What's he suggesting?
Eddie is saying, when your time's up, your time's up. Mr. Trudeau, do the right thing for yourself, do the right thing for the party, and finally do the right thing for the country, and please leave, step down. So he is by far the highest level Liberal to come out so far, although there was another former chief of staff from Atlantic Canada who came out many months ago before this head of steam started building around, the request to get Trudeau to resign. But Eddie Goldenberg is still a very respected figure. He's a lawyer with decades and decades of experience, and a political operator like there are very few. Eddie and I have known each other since law school. I really like the guy. I have a lot of good things to say about him, and I think that Eddie is speaking for a whole bunch of senior Liberals when he says that.
So one of the other things, according to Eddie Goldenberg's letter, if I have this right, is the idea that he suggests as well, beyond this time to go is now, that it would be a terrible thing for Quebec if a PQ government was elected, if in fact Justin Trudeau did not.
This is interesting. I think that might be a bit of a stretch, but if you've been following in the papers and in the commentariat, there are a couple of people out there. Gerald Butts is one of them, writing that as far as he's concerned, Quebec could be heading to another referendum if the PQ gets in. Who else did we hear that from? Well, we heard that from Andrew Coyne, a guy who writes out of Toronto. Now, frankly, neither of them knows a whole heck of a lot about Quebec. And I have to say that even though I respect both of them as commentators and analysts, they don't know a heck of a lot about Quebec. So for them to be opining that this means that we're heading for another referendum just doesn't take into account the demographic reality. The young people who were in university in the mid-'70s who elected the PQ and who were still around in the '80s, they were very, very separatist. They were strong sovereignists. That's not the case anymore. The demographics have shifted. Young Quebecers are onto something else. They know that we live in a peaceful democracy where people do well, and if you play by the rules, you can get ahead. And this is a really cool place if you look at the planet. You don't have to feel the same really dreadful, nationalism that always brought Quebec, oh, this is terrible how we're treated in Canada, it's time to leave. Now, we came this close in 95. There was cheating, and my riding was the worst hit, but it was very close in 95 because of the failure of Meach and Charlottetown. So there was a strong push then, and we came that close. But we would not come close now. All of the polling shows that maximum one-third of Quebecers would vote for simple separation. If that's what Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon intends to do if ever he gets in, and I think that's an open question, then he won't win. Why is it an open question? Because Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon is a little bit like the Pierre Poilievre of Quebec politics. Everybody wants desperately to get rid of François Legault. He's absolutely inept. His government doesn't know how to run anything, whether it's education or health or anything else. So people are saying, okay, who can defeat him? Well, that's why they voted for Quebec in Quebec City. Jean Talon riding just over a year ago, they voted for the PQ. I know a bunch of Federalists who voted for the PQ because they knew that it was the only party that could defeat Legault. So that's where we are right now. If the Liberals give themselves a decent leader, look, you and I have talked about what his chances are, but if you look at the recent poll by Léger, it says that if Pablo Rodriguez was in, all of a sudden Francophone Quebecers would start voting Liberal again. So whether it's with him or somebody else, it's going to reflect, Aaron, it's going to reflect the fact that Quebecers don't want separation. So I respect both Andrew Coyne and Mr. Butts, but I don't think that either of them knows what they're talking about when it comes to Quebec. And certainly for Eddie Goldenberg to somehow out of the blue say it's better that Trudeau steps down, then he can play a leading role if ever there's another referendum. Can I just say this? I worked every single day of the 95 referendum, and I worked hard as a volunteer in the 1980 referendum. I did both. In the 95 referendum, I was already a member of the National Assembly, and I worked tirelessly every day, up and down. I remember driving up to Montreal for a debate against Jacques Léonard on local radio. I was out there fighting hard for Quebec's place in Canada, fighting hard for Canada. You find me one thing that Justin Trudeau did then. He was an adult. He wasn't a kid. In 1980, nobody's going to hold it against him. He was a kid. But in 1995, he was an adult. He was working. He graduated from university. You find me one single thing he did in 1995 to fight for Canada, and I'll be amazed, because I haven't been able to find a single thing that he did.
So we'll take that to mean you don't put much credence in that suggestion about
that's just
fair enough.
That's just hokum. It's a way for Eddie to try to sell his thesis that Trudeau's got to go. It's much simpler than that. Trudeau's got to go because he's the only person who can ensure the victory of Pierre Poilievre. And people who are in the Liberal Party on the left side, progressive voters, and they're still the majority of Canadians, think of that with horror. But if indeed Trudeau has it in his head that he's the only one who has a chance and he's a good campaigner and he's got a chance against Poilievre, he's going to lead the Liberal Party to slaughter.
Tom, I want to get this in because we had a chance to speak to Paul Saint-Pierre Plamondon earlier in the show. So this is about their budget. You know, of course, Andre Pratt, a few economists coming out and basically saying it's flawed. And, of course, his position is it's not. What do you make of this, by the way, the fact that he says it's partisan? And I pointed out two of the economists here are, in fact, not tied to the Liberal Party. He seemed to suggest they have liberal roots. What did you make of the opinion expressed by this review, this deep dive into the PQ budget?
Can I take a step back to answer that?
Sure.
I'll just take a step back and say that anybody who starts playing the game of fighting with the PQ, whether their budget for year one is a good budget or a bad budget, year one of independence, it is playing the PQ's game. They want people talking up and having debates about what sovereignty would look like. I know some of the people who were involved in putting this thing together. Yes, most of them have liberal connections of one type or another, and they're certainly leaning liberal. Let's just put it that way. But I think it's a big mistake. I would not have spent 5 seconds reading this thing anymore. Of course it's a load of hokum. Of course it doesn't take anything into account about the absolute upheaval that it would represent. And by the way, the word upheaval, bouleversement, this is something that every PQ leader has admitted. The clearest ever was Pauline Marois, saying, oh yes, it'll be years and years of upheaval and perturbances and real difficulty. So talk about that. Talk about everything that's involved in this amazing country of ours, everything that you'd stand to lose. Don't start nitpicking about an imaginary budget after an imaginary first year of separation. You're playing the separatist game.
And we will leave it at that.